He was 19 years old, the most powerful person on earth. A living god worshipped by millions, covered in gold, buried in the most spectacular tomb ever discovered in human history. And for over 3,000 years, nobody knew the truth. Nobody knew that behind the golden mask, behind the legend, behind the most famous face in all of ancient Egypt, was a boy whose own family had destroyed him. Not with a weapon, not with poison, not with betrayal, with something far more disturbing. Something that had been happening in the Egyptian royal family for generations, hidden in plain sight, until modern science finally ripped the secret open 3,000 years after his death. In 2010, scientists ran DNA tests on Tutankhamun's mummy. What they found inside that golden boy's bones changed everything we thought we knew about the most famous pharaoh in history. This is the real story of King Tut, and it is far darker than any curse. When Howard Carter broke through the sealed doorway of Tomb KV62 in Egypt's Valley of the Kings on November 4, 1922, he saw something no human being had seen in over 3,000 years. An untouched royal burial chamber, completely intact, gold everywhere, chariots, thrones, statues. Thousands of objects arranged exactly as they had been placed the day Tutankhamun was buried around 1323 BC. And at the center of it all, a solid gold coffin. Inside 3 nested coffins. Inside a stone sarcophagus. Inside 4 gilded shrines. And inside all of that, a mummy wearing the most iconic object ever recovered from the ancient world. The golden death mask of Tutankhamun. The discovery made Tutankhamun the most famous pharaoh in history overnight. Not because of what he achieved in life. He ruled for only 9 years, from age 10 to 19, and left almost no significant monuments or military victories behind. He became famous purely because of what was found in his tomb. The golden mask, the treasure. The curse, which newspapers invented when several people connected to the excavation died in the years that followed. For decades, the world looked at that golden face and saw power. Wealth, divinity. Nobody looked closely enough at what was underneath it, until the scientists arrived with their DNA equipment. And what they found underneath that gold was not a god. It was a warning. Before we go deeper, if you want the real history that nobody teaches in school, subscribe right now and turn on the bell. I upload a brand new dark history story every single day. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers, and every single person who subscribes right now keeps this channel alive. 2 seconds. Subscribe, bell. Done. Now back to Tutankhamun. Because what the DNA revealed about his family is something that will stay with you. To understand what happened to Tutankhamun, you need to understand the world he was born into. The Egyptian royal family had a tradition that most people today find deeply disturbing. They married each other, not cousins, not distant relatives, brothers and sisters, parents and children. The closest possible blood relatives, married and producing heirs, generation after generation after generation. The reason was simple and completely logical by their standards. The royal bloodline was considered divine, the blood of the gods. To allow that blood to mix with commoners or even with other noble families was seen as a contamination of something sacred. So they kept it pure. For generations this worked, or at least appeared to work. The empire grew, the monuments rose, the pharaohs ruled, but biology does not care about tradition. Every generation of inbreeding, every marriage between close relatives increases the chance of genetic disorders. Recessive genes that would never express themselves in a normal mixed population get doubled, then tripled, then quadrupled. Generation after generation after generation of the same closed bloodline. By the time Tutankhamun was born, the damage was already done. The DNA analysis confirmed what scientists had long suspected. Tutankhamun's parents were brother and sister. His father was the famous pharaoh Akhenaten. His mother was one of Akhenaten's own sisters, her identity still unknown, referred to in the records only as the younger lady. A brother and a sister produced the boy who became the most famous pharaoh in history. And that single fact, that one act of royal tradition, wrote Tutankhamun's fate before he took his first breath. When scientists performed CT scans and full DNA analysis on Tutankhamun's mummy in 2010, they were not prepared for what they found. The Golden Boy, the divine pharaoh, the most powerful teenager on earth, had a body that was falling apart from the inside. He had a club foot. His left foot was severely deformed, the bones twisted inward, making normal walking extremely painful and possibly impossible without support. He had choler disease, a condition where the bones in the foot began to die and collapse due to interrupted blood supply. The scans showed bone necrosis, dead bone tissue, in multiple areas of his foot. He had a cleft palate, a split in the roof of his mouth present from birth. His spine was curved, scoliosis giving him a stooped, hunched posture that no amount of royal robes could fully conceal. His chest was malformed. His hips showed feminized bone development, a known result of severe inbreeding affecting hormonal development. And then there was the most revealing detail of all. Inside Tutankhamun's tomb, archaeologists had found over 130 walking sticks, 130 canes and staffs, many of them showing signs of actual use, worn at the tips from being leaned on. For decades, historians assumed these were ceremonial objects. Symbols of power. Royal regalia. The DNA and scan results told a completely different story. Tutankhamun needed those sticks to walk. The boy depicted in paintings striding confidently across battlefields, hunting lions, riding chariots, could barely stand without support. Everything the world had been shown about Tutankhamun was a carefully constructed image of strength that his broken body could never actually deliver. For decades after the tomb's discovery, theories about how Tutankhamun died multiplied endlessly. Murder, assassination, a blow to the head, a chariot accident, conspiracy by his advisors. The theories were dramatic. They were exciting. They matched the golden legend of a boy pharaoh brought down by intrigue and betrayal. The truth was quieter, and somehow much darker. The CT scan showed a fracture in Tutankhamun's left leg, just above the knee. A clean break. Relatively fresh at the time of death, the bone had not healed. For a healthy 19-year-old, a broken leg heals. It is painful and inconvenient, but it heals. Tutankhamun was not healthy. His immune system, already compromised by the genetic damage of generations of inbreeding, could not handle the injury. The wound became infected. The infection spread into the bone, and the DNA tests revealed one more thing hiding in his body: malaria, multiple strains of it. The most dangerous strain, Plasmodium falciparum, the kind that kills. Tutankhamun died from the combination of an infected broken leg and malaria, his body too genetically damaged to fight either one. Not murdered, not cursed, not killed by enemies or rivals, killed by his own DNA. Killed by a tradition his family had maintained for generations because they believed their blood was too sacred to share with anyone outside the bloodline. The most famous pharaoh in history was destroyed, not by the world outside, but by the family that created him. The golden mask of Tutankhamun is still the most recognized image from the ancient world. It sits in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Millions of people visit it every year. They stand in front of it and see power, wealth, mystery. Very few of them know what the face behind that mask actually looked like. A 19-year-old boy, club foot, curved spine, cleft palate, leaning on a walking stick just across a room, infected, malarial, in constant pain, painted on every wall as a warrior, buried as a god, and destroyed, completely and totally, by the very people who were supposed to protect him. This is what this channel is about, not the golden version, the real version, the version that 3,000 years of legend tried to bury along with the body. I research every single story on this channel completely, every source, every detail, every piece of evidence, so that you get the full picture, not just the famous parts. If that is what you came here for, subscribe and turn on the bell. New story every single day. We are almost at 1,000 subscribers. Every single person who subscribes right now is directly keeping this channel alive and making sure these stories keep getting told. Leave a comment below telling me which story hit you hardest. I read every single one. Next, we go to Dallas. November 22nd, 1963, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And the detail about that day that almost nobody knows, that changes the entire story. That one is coming very soon. Do not miss it. What defeats the undefeatable? Not a better warrior, not a stronger knight, not a faster sword or a longer lance. July 3rd, 1453. The Siege of Paucas. The greatest tournament champion in Europe stands on the ramparts. Custom armor, perfect fit, never pierced. He has never lost a single joust, never been unhorsed, never been defeated. Then a distant boom, a flash of light. And Jacques de la Lange, the undefeated champion of the 15th century, was gone. His name was Jacques de la Lange, born 1421 in Burgundy, called the Good Knight by all who knew him, because he embodied everything chivalry was supposed to be. Handsome, courteous, generous. He helped the poor. He protected women. He treated defeated enemies with respect. He was the living ideal of knighthood, the dream every young squire had. And he could fight. God, could he fight, tournament after tournament, joust after joust. Across France, Burgundy, Spain, Portugal, Scotland. He never lost, not once, in an era when knights traveled Europe seeking glory. Jacques de la Lange was the final boss. Nobody could beat him. Lange was more than a knight. He was a celebrity. Crowds gathered wherever he competed. His victories were written down and published. His exploits became stories people told their children. He once issued an open challenge. Any knight in Europe could face him. Over the course of 1 year, he fought all comers. He defeated every single one. Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy, was his patron, the richest man in Europe. Lange was his champion, his living symbol of Burgundian power. But the world was changing, and Lange refused to see it. 1453 was a pivotal year. The Ottoman Empire had just conquered Constantinople. The Eastern Roman Empire was finished. The medieval world was cracking apart. Gunpowder was changing everything. Cannon had been used for decades, but many knights despised the weapon. It was cowardly, they said. A peasant's weapon, an honorless way to kill. Real warriors fought face to face. Steel against steel, not hiding behind a machine. Jacques de la Lange shared this contempt. He was the perfect knight of the perfect age. Gunpowder weapons were an insult to everything he stood for, an insult to chivalry itself. July 3rd, 1453. The Siege of Paucas, Flanders. Duke Philip's forces were besieging a rebel town. Lange was inspecting the defenses, walking the ramparts, doing exactly what a knight commander should do. Across the field, inside the besieged town, the defenders had a cannon, crude by later standards. An iron tube packed with gunpowder, a rough iron ball inside. The gunners loaded their weapon. They aimed it toward the ramparts. They lit the fuse. The explosion was deafening. The iron ball flew across the battlefield at a speed no human eye could track. It struck Jacques de la Lange directly in the head. The greatest knight in Europe was dead before he hit the ground. Age 32, undefeated in every knightly contest, destroyed by the weapon he most despised. The death of Lange was more than the death of one man. It was the death of an idea. His elaborate custom armor? Useless. His perfect jousting technique? Irrelevant. His unbroken record of victory? It meant nothing against gunpowder. The age of chivalry had been dying for years. The Black Death had killed a third of Europe's population. National armies were replacing noble retinues. Gunpowder was making knights obsolete. Lange had refused to see it. He died as he lived, in armor, on a battlefield, believing in a world that no longer existed. His story was published after his death. The Book of the Feats of Jacques de la Lange, a monument to the ideal of knighthood. Written just as that ideal was destroyed forever. Jacques de la Lange, the good knight, undefeated, untouched, unstoppable, by any weapon his world understood. Killed in an instant by the future he refused to accept. There is a lesson here. The armor you trust most cannot protect you from what you refuse to see coming. Jacques de la Lange saw that lesson. At the very last second. Subscribe, because history never warns you first. Some men are so perfect that even their death is perfect. April 30th, 1524. Italy. The most respected knight in Europe lies dying. An arquebus ball has shattered his spine. He cannot move his legs. He knows he will not survive. He refuses to leave the battlefield. He refuses to be carried. He gives one final order: prop me against that oak tree. Face me toward the enemy, and bring me my sword. His full name was Pierre Terrail, Seigneur de Bayard. But all of Europe called him simply the Knight Without Fear and Beyond Reproach. Born around 1473 in Dauphiné, France, son of a knight, grandson of a knight. He was raised to be exactly one thing: the perfect warrior. By age 13, he was a page at the Savoy court. By age 17, he fought his first battle. By age 30, he was already a legend. He had defended a bridge alone against 200 Spanish soldiers. Just him. One man, one sword. He held that bridge. He once held a garrison of just a few hundred men, against an army of 10,000. He succeeded. This was Bayard. What made Bayard special was not just skill. Every era has skilled warriors. What made Bayard unique was his character. He never ransomed prisoners for money when they were poor. He paid his soldiers from his own pocket when the king ran short. He personally knighted Francis I of France on the battlefield. The king asked Bayard to do it, saying, "You alone are worthy." He treated enemies with respect. He treated women with absolute courtesy. He treated peasants the same as nobles. In a century of brutality and corruption, Pierre de Bayard was genuinely, almost impossibly, good. But Bayard had one great contempt: firearms, the arquebus, the early musket, gunpowder weapons spreading across Europe. To Bayard, these weapons were cowardice made mechanical. Any peasant could point one and kill a noble warrior. Any untrained conscript could murder a knight who had trained for decades. It removed honor from killing. It removed skill. It removed everything that made warfare chivalric. Bayard reportedly said that gunners deserved no mercy, that dying by a firearm was a dishonorable death, that such weapons had no place in a world of honorable men. History had a response to that. April 30th, 1524. The Battle of the Sesia, northern Italy. French forces were retreating. Someone had to hold the rear guard. To buy time for the main army to escape, Bayard volunteered. He commanded the rearguard action, fighting to hold back the Imperial and Spanish forces, giving his retreating comrades time to reach safety. Classic Bayard, always the one who stayed behind. During the fighting, an arquebus ball found him. It hit him in the lower back. The lead ball shattered his spine. Pierre de Bayard, the Knight Without Fear, could no longer feel his legs. He knew what it meant. He had seen enough battlefield injuries. This was fatal. His men tried to carry him from the field. He refused. He ordered them to prop him against an oak tree. Facing the enemy. Always facing the enemy. He took his sword. He drove the blade point first into the earth before him. He clasped the crossguard, using it as a crucifix, and he began to pray. As he bled to death against the oak tree, facing his enemies, the imperial commander, the Constable of Bourbon, rode up. He expressed sympathy for the dying knight. Bayard's response was famous: "Do not pity me. I die as a man of honor should die. Pity yourself. You fight against your king and your country." Pierre de Bayard died against the oak tree, sword planted before him like a cross, face turned toward his enemies, exactly as he had ordered. The Knight Without Fear, killed by the weapon he most despised. But here is what history remembers. Even his enemies mourned him. Imperial commanders paid tribute. Spanish soldiers saluted his body. Even enemies who had tried to kill him wept at his death. That is the measure of a man. When your enemies mourn you, you lived correctly. Subscribe. For 1K, please. He invented Parliament, or something very close to it. He forced the king to share power with elected representatives. He created a council that included commoners. Not just nobles, not just clergy, ordinary people with voices in government. August 4th, 1265, the Battle of Evesham. Simon de Montfort is surrounded. The king's forces have cut off every escape. He knows he will not leave this field alive. What they did to his body after death was so savage that even the king's own supporters were disgusted. Simon de Montfort, born around 1208 in France. He came to England as a younger son seeking opportunity. He married the king's sister. He became Earl of Leicester. He was, by any measure, an insider. King Henry III trusted him, sent him to govern Gascony in southern France. De Montfort governed it harshly, perhaps too harshly. He faced charges of brutality. The relationship with the king soured. But something had changed in de Montfort. He had seen how government worked, and he believed it worked badly. He believed the king had too much unchecked power, and someone needed to do something about it. England had the Magna Carta, signed 1215, limiting royal power, but Henry III routinely ignored it. He taxed without consent. He appointed foreign favorites over English nobles. He made decisions without consulting anyone. In 1258, de Montfort led the baronial reform movement, the provisions of Oxford, requiring the king to govern with a council, to hold regular meetings, to consult his nobles. But de Montfort went further. In 1265, he called what historians call the first true parliament. It included knights from the counties and burgesses from the towns, commoners, merchants, proper, people who had never had political voice. This was revolutionary. The king was furious. Civil war had broken out. De Montfort captured King Henry himself at the Battle of Lewes in 1264. He held the king prisoner, governing England in his name, but Henry's son, Prince Edward, the future Edward I, was free. And he was not his father. He was brilliant, ruthless, patient. Edward spent months building his forces, gathering allies, studying de Montfort's tactics, learning from them. He cut off de Montfort's army, separated him from his son's reinforcing forces, trapped him at Evesham. The encirclement was perfect. There was no way out. De Montfort knew he was trapped. He knew the battle was lost before it began. He rode into it anyway. "Let us commend our souls to God," he reportedly said, "because our bodies are theirs." He fought fiercely. He always fought fiercely. A royalist soldier stabbed him in the neck during the battle. He fell. More soldiers came. King Henry III had ordered something specific about de Montfort. He wanted an example made, an unmistakable message to anyone who thought of rebellion. A squad of 12 soldiers was assigned to de Montfort's body. What they did was methodical, clinical, deliberate. They hacked off his hands. They hacked off his feet. They cut off his head. They castrated his corpse. And in a final act of degradation that shocked even hardened medieval soldiers, they hung his severed testicles on either side of his own nose, on his severed head. The mutilated head was sent to de Montfort's wife, Lady Eleanor, the king's own sister, who had loved and supported her husband through everything. The body parts were scattered, denied proper burial. Everything designed to erase Simon de Montfort from history, from memory. It failed completely. De Montfort's followers treated the site of Evesham as a shrine. Miracles were reportedly attributed to him. He was venerated as a saint by common people. The parliament he created could not be undestroyed. His ideas survived. The principle that kings must govern with consent, that commoners deserved representation, that power should be checked. These ideas are alive today in every democratic parliament on earth. Simon de Montfort. His body was mutilated beyond recognition, scattered across England, denied burial. His ideas are sitting in legislatures on every continent. Right now, at this exact moment, you cannot kill ideas. Edward stirs to form Probablus II. You can destroy the body. You cannot destroy what the mind created. Simon de Montfort is in every parliament that has ever existed. The king's worst nightmare. 1. Subscribe. Because the ideas always outlast the bodies.
What would you do if your king asked you to carry his heart into battle? Not a metaphor, not a symbol. His actual embalmed heart in a silver casket around your neck. August 25th, 1330, Spain. A Scottish knight stands surrounded by hundreds of enemy cavalry. He reaches up and removes the casket from around his neck. He looks at it one final time, and then he throws it. What happened next will haunt you forever. His name was Sir James Douglas, born around 1286 in Scotland. The English called him the Black Douglas, not because of his appearance, but because of what he did in the dark. Douglas was one of Scotland's most feared warriors. He specialized in night raids, silent, brutal, unstoppable. English mothers used his name to frighten children into bed. "Hush now, or the Black Douglas will come for you." He had fought alongside William Wallace, he had bled for Robert the Bruce, and he had sworn an oath of absolute loyalty, an oath that would define the way he died. By 1329, Robert the Bruce was dying. The great warrior king of Scotland lay broken by illness. Some said it was leprosy, some said it was the accumulated wounds of 30 years of war. Whatever it was killing him slowly. Bruce had one unfulfilled dream. He had always wanted to go on crusade to Jerusalem, to fight for the Holy Land. His wars with England had made that impossible. On his deathbed, Bruce made a final request. He asked Douglas to take his heart to Jerusalem after death, to fight one last battle, even if only his heart could be there. Douglas agreed instantly, immediately, without hesitation, because that is what loyalty meant in the 14th century. After Bruce died, his heart was removed and embalmed, placed in a small silver casket, decorated with intricate carvings. Douglas hung it around his neck on a heavy chain and began the long journey to Jerusalem. He traveled from Scotland through England, through France, and into Spain. Everywhere he went, people stared at the silver casket. They knew what it contained. They knew the story behind it. But Douglas never reached Jerusalem. In Spain, he made a fateful decision. The Spanish king, Alfonso XI, was fighting the Moorish armies. Douglas chose to join the battle. He would fight for Christ here, he decided, and carry Bruce's heart into this holy war. The Battle of Taba, August 25, 1330. Douglas and his Scottish knights rode into battle, but the Spanish forces retreated unexpectedly. Douglas found himself completely surrounded. Moorish cavalry closed in from every direction. He had only seconds to decide. He could surrender, he could try to fight his way out, or... Douglas reached up and grabbed the silver casket. He unclasped it from his neck. He looked at it one final time, and he hurled it into the thickest mass of enemy soldiers. He screamed, "Lead on, brave heart! I will follow thee!" And he charged alone into hundreds of enemies, fighting his way toward where the casket had fallen, cutting, slashing, refusing to stop until he could not move any more. When the battle ended, Scottish soldiers searched the field for Douglas. They eventually found him. His body was lying face down in the dirt, multiple spear wounds in his back. He had been overwhelmed from behind, but underneath his body, pressed against the earth by his final weight, was the silver casket. He had reached it. He had died covering it, protecting his king's heart with his own body. Even in death, he did not let it fall. Both Douglas and Bruce's heart were returned to Scotland. Bruce's heart was buried at Melrose Abbey. Douglas was buried at St. Bride's Kirk. Two warriors, one oath, one impossible ending. The English feared him in life. They called him the Black Douglas. But in his final moment, he became something else entirely. He was the most loyal man who ever lived. Subscribe, because history's darkest stories are just beginning.
He wrote the manual, the definitive guide to being a perfect knight. He had fought hundreds of battles. He was Marshal of France. He was 54 years old and still a warrior. October 25, 1415, Agincourt, the most famous English victory in medieval history. Boucicaut rode into that battle in full plate armor. Confident, experienced, the best France had. The field was covered in mud, heavy, thick, sucking, after days of rain. Boucicaut stepped into it and sank. A peasant soldier simply walked over and pulled him out of the ground. Jean de Miengre, known as Boucicaut, born around 1366, son of a distinguished knight. From childhood, he was destined for greatness. By age 16, he was fighting in tournaments. By 24, he was a famous warrior. He went on crusade, twice. He fought the Ottomans. He fought the English. He fought the pirates of the Mediterranean. He was appointed Marshal of France, the highest military office in the kingdom, below only the king. And he wrote the Book of the Deeds of Good Boucicaut, a chivalric manual. Like Charny before him, he put the code into words. But Boucicaut would not die gloriously. He would die forgotten. in a damp prison cell, far from France, October 24th, 1415. The night before Agincourt. It had been raining for days. The fields of northern France were saturated. The mud was unlike anything English soldiers had seen before. The French army was enormous, perhaps 12,000 to 36,000 men, against Henry V's exhausted English force of maybe 6,000. Boucicaut knew these odds. He had seen lopsided victories before. France should win. France should absolutely win. The French nobility was confident to the point of arrogance. They were arguing over who would get to capture Henry V, who would earn the ransom. They had already drafted the victory proclamation. They had not thought carefully about the mud. The battle began. French cavalry charged the English lines. Into the mud, the horses began to struggle. The men in full plate armor. The men weigh. Jags, jing 200 pounds with their equipment. Sank, English longbowmen fired at close range. Thousands of arrows per minute. Horses screamed and fell. Riders were thrown into the mud. Armored knights struggling to stand back up. Unable to. The French mounted charge had created a pile of struggling, sinking men. English soldiers, lightly equipped, ran forward, into the mud, among the helpless knights, and began killing them, with mallets, with daggers, finding the gaps in the armor, where a man cannot reach to protect himself, while he sinks. Boucicaut was not killed. He was captured. A peasant soldier, barely armored, walked up to the struggling Marshal of France and simply pulled him out of the mud. Like pulling a turnip from a garden, the most decorated military officer in France, captured by a peasant, because he sank. The English realized what they had. A Marshal of France. The ransom would be enormous. He was sent to England, given comfortable quarters. While the negotiations proceeded, comfortable quarters that he would never leave. Boucicaut spent the last 6 years of his life in English captivity. Yorkshire, far from France, far from the son of Gascony, far from the Mediterranean he had sailed, far from everything he had known. The ransom negotiations dragged on. France had been catastrophically defeated at Agincourt. The country was in chaos. Boucicaut's value to the English was significant, but the ransom was never paid. He died on June 20, 1421, in his prison quarters in Yorkshire. Of illness. The exact nature is not recorded. Perhaps pneumonia. Perhaps the accumulated damage of a lifetime of warfare. Perhaps simply despair. No glorious last stand. No famous last words. No sword planted in the earth. No banner held to the last. Just a cold, damp room in England. And then nothing. Jean yon tout le miengre Boucicaut. He had survived crusades. He had survived pirate battles. He had survived the Ottomans. He had survived decades of warfare. He was undone by mud, by the weight of his own armor, by a peasant who knew how to walk in it. There is something deeply dark in this story. Not the death at Agincourt, but the years after. The long, slow fade. The prison cell. The forgotten ending. The great warrior's worst enemy was not a sword. It was time and waiting. Subscribe, because sometimes surviving the battle is not the hard part.
Imagine dying because you needed to breathe. July 21, 1403, Shrewsbury, England. The most famous knight in England stands in the middle of a battle, sweat pouring inside his steel helmet, temperature inside his armor reaching unbearable levels. He can barely breathe. For one single second, he lifts his visor, just for a breath, just one. That one breath killed him. His name was Sir Henry Percy, but nobody called him that. Everyone called him Harry Hotspur because of his legendary impatience, his furious temper, his absolute refusal to wait for anything. Born 1364, son of the Earl of Northumberland. By age 14 he was already fighting. By age 20 he was already famous. By age 30 he was a legend. He fought the Scots on the northern border. He fought the Welsh in the mountains. He fought the French across the Channel. He fought constantly, aggressively, brilliantly. He never retreated, never hesitated. He charged first and thought later, hence Hotspur. By 1403, Hotspur had a problem. His patron and king, Henry IV, had turned against his family. The Percy family felt betrayed. They had helped Henry take the throne, and Henry had repaid them with broken promises. So Hotspur did what Hotspur always did. He acted immediately. He raised an army. He marched. He challenged the king directly. It was brave. It was bold. It was completely Hotspur. And it would get him killed. July 21, 1403. The Battle of Shrewsbury. A scorching summer day. The sun beat down on thousands of armored knights, full-plate armor weighing 60 to 100 pounds, steel covering every inch of the body, head to toe, locked shut. Inside the armor it was an oven. Knights sweated rivers. Their breath fogged the inside of their visors. Dehydration set in within minutes. Heat exhaustion was a real danger. The same armor meant to protect them was slowly cooking them alive. Hotspur fought in the thick of it, commanding, inspiring, unstoppable. His men followed him because he never stopped. But inside his helmet, the heat was becoming unbearable. The battle raged for hours, thousands of men fighting in the July heat, English longbowmen firing thousands of arrows. The sky was dark with projectiles. Hotspur was exhausted, soaked in sweat inside his sealed armor. The heat inside his helmet had become suffocating. He needed air, just one breath of actual fresh air. He reached up. His gauntleted fingers found his visor. He flipped it open, just for a second, just for one desperate breath. An English longbow arrow was already in the air, fired from somewhere in the chaos, a random shot among thousands. It flew across the battlefield and entered directly through his open mouth, piercing through the back of his skull, into his brain. Harry Hotspur died instantly. His army saw it happen. The moment their commander fell, the fight went out of them. The rebellion collapsed immediately. Henry IV won the battle. But here is the dark truth. The arrow that killed Hotspur was not aimed at him. It was a random shot, one of thousands fired blindly into the battle. The greatest knight in England was killed by a single random arrow, in the 1 second he needed to breathe. History remembers him as Shakespeare's wild warrior in Henry IV, Part 1, the man too hot to be contained, too hot, and in the end, too hot inside his own armor. Subscribe, because the dark side keeps getting darker.
Warning: what you are about to hear is not the movie version. August 23rd, 1305, London. A Scottish warrior stands in a crowded court. He has been convicted of treason. He has one thing left to say: I cannot be a traitor to Edward, for I never swore allegiance to him. The judge ignored him. The sentence was read. And what followed was one of the darkest things medieval England ever did. William Wallace, born around 1270, Scotland. We actually know very little about his early life. That's the first dark truth about his story. The Wallace of movies is a romantic hero, fighting for love, for freedom, for Scotland. The real Wallace was more complicated. He was a minor noble, not a peasant hero. He had some education, possibly in the church. His family had connections to the Scottish nobility. What drove him to rebellion? We don't know for certain. Some say the English killed his family. Some say it was pure patriotism. Some say it was self-preservation. The truth is buried in 700 years of legend. What we do know is that Wallace fought relentlessly, brilliantly. He defeated an English army at Stirling Bridge in 1297, a decisive tactical victory. He used the terrain, the bridge, the timing. He was a natural military genius. He was appointed Guardian of Scotland, the first commoner to hold that title. He administered justice. He organized resistance. For one extraordinary year, Scotland was free. Then came Falkirk, 1298. Edward I brought his full power north. Wallace was outmaneuvered. His Schiltron formations were broken by English archers. Scotland was crushed, and Wallace became a fugitive. For 7 years, Wallace evaded capture. 7 years as England hunted him, moving through the Scottish Highlands, occasionally raiding, occasionally hiding, never giving up. Edward was with him. He put a massive price on Wallace's head. Every year the manhunt continued. Every year Wallace survived, until 1305. He was betrayed, the identity of the betra. Yare is debated. Some say it was a Scottish noble named John de Menteith, sold to the English, one of his own people. Wallace was captured near Glasgow, bound, stripped of his sword, and taken south, to London, to King Edward. The trial was a formality. Wallace was convicted of treason. He made his argument. He had never sworn allegiance to Edward, therefore he could not be a traitor. Legally, he was correct. Morally, it didn't matter. The sentence was designed to be the most horrific possible. Every stage calculated to maximize suffering and humiliation. Wallace was stripped naked, tied behind a horse, dragged through London streets for miles, through mud, refuse, and crowds throwing things. At Smithfield, he was hanged, but not killed. Cut down while still conscious. While still alive, he was emasculated. His intestines were cut out, burned before his eyes. While he could still see them, then he was beheaded, and his body cut into 4 pieces. The pieces of William Wallace were sent across Scotland. His right arm to Newcastle, his left arm to Berwick, his right leg to Perth, his left leg to Stirling. His head was placed on a spike on London Bridge. Edward's message was clear. This is what happens to those who resist. This is what happens to rebels. Submit, or this fate is yours. It did not work. Wallace's martyrdom had the opposite effect. His death inspired more resistance than his life ever had. Robert the Bruce watched Wallace die, and decided Scotland would never stop fighting. 5 years after Wallace's execution, Scotland was at war again. 15 years after his death, Scotland won at Bannockburn. William Wallace, Guardian of Scotland, executed in the most brutal way medieval England could devise. His body scattered across the country he had died for, as a warning to others. Instead, it became a rally cry. There is something, Edward, thou art never understood. You cannot kill an idea. By scattering Wallace's body across Scotland, every piece of Wallace became a fire, and Scotland burned with it. Subscribe, because martyrs always win eventually. He made kings. Literally. He put 2 different men on the English throne. He removed them when they displeased him. He was the wealthiest man in England, the most powerful nobleman alive. April 14th, 1471. The Battle of Barnet. Richard Neville, the kingmaker, is fleeing. The battle is turned against him. He needs to reach his horse. His horse is tied in the woods nearby. He is running in full plate armor. Have you ever tried to run in full plate armor? He didn't make it to the woods. Richard Neville, 16th Earl of Warwick. Born 1428 into England's most powerful noble family. He didn't just inherit wealth and power. He amplified it to something unprecedented. At his peak, Neville's income exceeded that of the king. He maintained personal armies. He controlled vast territories. He fed thousands of retainers daily. His power made every king nervous, and he used that power to decide who would be king. He put Edward IV on the throne in 1461. When Edward defied him, Neville removed him. He put Henry VI back on the throne in 1470, allying with his former enemies, switching sides as political convenience demanded. This was the kingmaker England's Wars of the Roses, named for the symbols of the 2 rival houses. York with the white rose, Lancaster with the red, a civil war that would devastate the English nobility for 30 years. Neville played both sides. He was initially Yorkist, Edward IV's chief supporter. Then he switched to Lancaster, allying with Margaret of Anjou, his former bitter enemy. The cynicism was breathtaking, but this was medieval politics. Survival above loyalty, power above principle. The kingmaker understood this perfectly, until the morning he didn't. April 14, 1471, Easter Sunday. The Battle of Barnet. Outside London. Before dawn, the armies took their positions in the dark. Neville commanded the Lancastrian forces. Edward IV led York. Two men who had once been the most powerful alliance in England, now enemies. And then the fog came, not a lig. Morning mist. A heavy, blinding, absolute fog. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Soldiers could barely see the men next to them. In that fog, catastrophic confusion took hold. Lancastrian troops attacked their own allies by mistake, thinking they were enemy forces. It collapsed the left flank, and then the whole line. The battle was lost. Neville had to leave the field. Quickly, he had a horse waiting, in the woods nearby. If he could reach it, he could escape, regroup, fight another day. The kingmaker had survived setbacks before. There was one problem. Richard Neville, 16th Earl of Warwick, was wearing the finest, most expensive plate armor that English money could buy. Custom fitted, elaborately decorated, probably weighing close to 100 pounds. He ran, or tried to. Full plate armor is not designed for running. It is designed for fighting on horseback or standing in formation. Enemy foot soldiers were much lighter. They had shed heavy armor for mobility. They could run, Neville could not. They caught him before he reached the trees. The soldiers surrounded the kingmaker. He could not outrun them. He could not fight them all. He was exhausted from the battle. The soldiers forced open his visor, the one vulnerable point, the face behind the steel, and drove a dagger through his throat. Richard Neville, the man who had made and unmade kings, died on his knees in the mud, at Barnet, killed by common foot soldiers, because he couldn't run fast enough. Edward IV, the King Neville had made, then fought, had him identified, had the body displayed publicly in London, so everyone could see, so no rumors of survival could spread. The kingmaker was dead. Richard Neville. He decided who wore the crown of England. He was richer than the king, more powerful than any single nobleman before him. And in the end, he died. Because he was wearing too much armor to run away. The trap wasn't the dagger. The trap was the armor, the symbol of his power. Became his prison. The man who thought he was above kings died unable to outrun a foot soldier. Subscribe, because power always has a weakness. He was dying of thirst, a serious wound bleeding on the battlefield. A flask of water finally in his hands. He raised it to his lips. And then he stopped. He had seen something. A common soldier nearby, dying, thirsty, forgotten. Sir Philip Sidney looked at the water, looked at the dying man, and handed it away. He said 4 words that history has never forgotten. "Thy necessity is yet greater than mine." And then he died. Sir Philip Sidney was not just a knight. He was the Renaissance ideal made flesh. Born 1554, son of a prominent English family. By his 20s, he was already extraordinary. Poet, scholar, courtier, soldier, diplomat. He did everything brilliantly. His literary works defined an era. Arcadia, A Defense of Poesy, Astrophil and Stella. He wrote with the same intensity he fought. He was friends with Francis Drake, Edmund Spenser, and Queen Elizabeth herself. He was everything the age of Elizabeth celebrated. Beauty, intelligence, courage, honor. And, like all things too perfect, he did not last long. September 1586, Zutphen, Netherlands. England was fighting to support Dutch Protestant rebels against Spanish imperial forces. Sidney was commanding English cavalry. Before the battle, he noticed something. A veteran officer riding into combat. A man with experience and courage. But the officer had left behind his cuisses, the armor plates that protect the thighs. Perhaps they were damaged. Perhaps they were uncomfortable. Whatever the reason, the man was unprotected. Sidney made a decision. If his comrade rode unprotected, then Sidney would not be better protected. He removed his own thigh armor and rode into battle without it. That decision would kill him. The cavalry charge was fierce. Spanish muskets firing into the English ranks. Sidney rode at the front, always at the front. A musket ball found the gap where his armor had been. It struck him in the left thigh, the unprotected left thigh. The wound was serious, but not immediately fatal. Sit-in. Practice not a fortis to gravitas word 10. The battle continued without him. He would survive the battle, but the weeks after would be the real enemy. Sidney was carried from the field. The wound was cleaned as best they could, but infection had already begun its slow work. Over the following days and weeks, Sidney's condition deteriorated. Gangrene spread through the wounded leg. The 16th century had no antibiotics, no way to stop what had started. But before the end came, before the gangrene finished its work, there was a moment, a small human moment, that history remembered forever. Sidney was being carried from the battlefield, suffering terribly, desperately thirsty. Someone gave him a flask of water. He raised it to his parched lips and saw the dying common soldier, lying in the mud nearby, looking at the water with desperate eyes. Sidney lowered the flask from his own lips and held it out. "Thy necessity is yet greater than mine." Sir Philip Sidney died at Arnhem on October 17, 1586. He was 31 years old. The infection had spread too far. There was nothing more to be done. His death devastated England. Queen Elizabeth wore mourning for him. Poets across Europe wrote elegies. Edmund Spenser wrote Astrophel. The Netherlands mourned him as a hero. But here's the dark irony. Sidney died because he chose solidarity, because he refused to be better protected than a fellow soldier. His honor killed him. The act of giving away the water? He was already dying when he did it. The thigh wound had sealed his fate weeks before. The water wouldn't have saved him. But he didn't know that for certain. He gave it away anyway. Sir Philip Sidney, poet, scholar, knight, dead at 31. From a wound he chose to make possible, by removing his own armor, out of solidarity with a fellow soldier. He is remembered today for 4 words. 4 words spoken to a dying stranger. While Sidney himself was dying, that is either the most beautiful thing in history, or the saddest, or both. Subscribe, because the best people always have the shortest stories. He was one of England's greatest knights. A founding member of the Order of the Garter, he had survived countless battles, decades of warfare. December 30, Honest 1369, New Year's Eve. Sir John Chandos walks forward to engage the enemy. One step, his brute catches something. He looks down. It's his own surcoat. His flowing decorative robe caught under his foot. He falls. The frosted grass gives way under him. He doesn't see the attack coming from his right, because he is blind in his right eye. And when he hits the ground, a French squire is already there. Sir John Chandos, born around 1320, English noble family. He rose through military service to become one of Edward III's most trusted commanders. The Order of the Garter, founded 1348 by King Edward III. The most prestigious chivalric order in England. Chandos was among the original founding knights. One of the chosen few, the inner circle of English chivalry. He fought at Crécy, he fought at Poitiers. 2 of the greatest English victories of the 100 Years' War. He was present for them both. Not just present, he was instrumental. He was also Constable of Aquitaine, one of England's most powerful positions in France. A man trusted with the governance of territory, trusted with everything. At some point in his long military career, Chandos lost the sight in his right eye. The records don't specify exactly when or how. A wound, an injury, some accident. He continued fighting. Because knights in the 14th century continued fighting. You did not retire because of an injury. You adapted. Chandos adapted. But a blind right eye meant something specific. His right side had no peripheral vision. An enemy approaching from his right could be invisible to him until they were close enough to strike. In the chaos of a skirmish, in the fog of battle, that blind spot was a death sentence waiting to happen. The surcoat, a flowing robe worn over armor, embroidered with a knight's coat of arms. Practical in some ways, it entified the knight. It displayed his family's heraldic colors. It was beautiful. It was prestigious. It was also an extremely impractical thing to wear into a fight on foot. Flowing fabric, heavy silk embroidery, reaching to below the knees. On a frosted, slippery morning, Chandos wore a long white surcoat, his coat of arms embroidered in detail, the finest textile craftsmanship. Exactly the kind of thing a celebrated knight wore. Exactly the kind of thing that could tangle around his boots. December 30 Honest, 1369. A skirmish at Lussac-les-Châteaux in France. Chandos was advancing on foot toward French forces. New Year's Eve. Heavy frost on the grass. The ground was slippery. He stepped forward. His boot came down on the hem of his own surcoat. The fabric pulled tight. For one disorienting second, he was caught. His forward momentum carried him. His foot was held. He twisted. The frosted grass provided no grip, no traction. He went down, hard. His blind right side was exposed, his body on the ground, his right side toward the enemy. A French squire was attacking from exactly that direction. Chandos couldn't see him. He hit the ground. The squire drove his dagger into Chandos's face as he fell, through the eye socket, into the brain. Sir John Chandos died from the wound the following morning. January Honest, 1370. New Year's Day. He had survived Crécy. He had survived Poitiers. He had survived decades of the 100 Years' War. He had survived everything the French army could throw at him. He was killed by his own ceremonial robe. And a patch of frost. On New Year's Eve, the French mourned him. The Black Prince, his close friend, was devastated. Even enemies paid tribute. He was buried in the church of Saint-Julien-de-l'Arc, near Poitiers, near the field where he had won one of his greatest triumphs. As if history wanted him close to his glory. Even in death, Sir John Chandos, founding knight of the Order of the Garter, victor of Crécy and Poitiers, one of the most experienced warriors of his age, killed by his own fashion choices and a blind spot, on the last day of the year. There is something almost absurd about it. Almost. But there is also something deeply human. Even the greatest warriors are undone by small things. Not the sword they can see coming, but the hem of their own robe. Subscribe, because the smallest thing can end the greatest story. He wrote the book on honor. Literally. He sat down and wrote out everything a perfect knight should be. Every virtue, every responsibility, every sacrifice. He called it the Book of Chivalry. The most respected treatise on knightly honor ever written, September 19, 1356, the Battle of Poitiers. Geoffroy de Charny held France's most sacred battle banner, the Oriflamme, the holy red flag that meant no mercy, no surrender. English soldiers hit him from every direction. Swords, axes, spears. He held the banner. They had to pry his dead fingers from the pole. Geoffroy de Charny was born around 1314 into the French nobility. He was everything the knightly ideal demanded. Brave, pious, loyal, just. But what made him unique was that he wrote it down, the Book of Chivalry. A systematic examination of what it meant to be a knight, what you owed your lord, your God, your enemies, your own soul. He didn't write it as theory. He wrote it as practice. He had lived every line of it. Every principle was something he had personally tested on a battlefield, and he was about to test the last one, the hardest one, the one about dying for what you carry. The Oriflamme was not just a flag, it was France, the sacred battle standard of the French kings. A blood-red banner kept at the Abbey of St. Denis, only taken out in times of national crisis. Carrying the Oriflamme was the greatest military honor in France. It also meant something else. When the Oriflamme was raised, no prisoners would be taken. No quarter given. A fight to the finish, King John II of France gave Charny this honor, the most respected knight carrying the most sacred banner. Charny accepted. He had written about this exact situation, about dying for your lord's honor. Now, he would live, or die, by his own words. September 19, 1356. The Black Prince, Edward of Woodstock, commanded English forces. King John II led France. The battle turned badly for the French. English longbowmen decimated the French cav. Aury. The same tactic that had worked at Crécy a decade earlier. French knights charging into waves of arrows. Falling, dying, retreating. The king's bodyguard was surrounded. English forces closed in from every direction. Charny stood beside his king. The oriflamme raised high, visible to everyone. A red flame above the chaos. The English wanted the king, alive if possible. Ransoming a French king was worth a fortune, but they needed to break through Charny first. And Charny would not move. He stood his ground, the oriflamme still raised, his sword arm defending both king and banner. They hit him. A sword cut, then another. An axe blow, a spear thrust. Each time he was struck, his sword arm weakened. But his banner arm held. The hand on the oriflamme's pole never released. He fell, still holding the banner, the pole in his grip as he hit the ground, his hands locked around it. Even after he stopped breathing, his fingers would not release. They had to physically pry his dead hands from the pole. King John II was captured, held for ransom. France paid enormously for his return. It nearly bankrupted the kingdom, but Charny was not captured. He was not ransomed. He died on that field, doing exactly what his book of chivalry said a knight should do. Here is the irony that haunts his story. Charny's book of chivalry was widely read. It influenced knightly culture for generations, and Charny also possessed one of history's most controversial relics. Many believe he owned the Shroud of Turin, the burial cloth claimed to bear the image of Christ. If true, Charny carried Christ's burial cloth in life, and France's battle flag in death. J. Freud de Charny, author of the Code of Honor, he wrote that a knight should give everything for his lord, should never release the sacred trust placed in him, should die rather than fail his duty. Then he went out and did exactly that, not because someone was watching, not for fame or reward, because he believed every word he had written. The man who wrote the book on honor died proving he meant it. Subscribe, because some people actually live what they preach. Before Nuremberg, before the Geneva Convention, before international law existed. Pause, there was one trial. 1474. Breisach, Holy Roman Empire. A knight stood before a court of Swiss and German judges. Not tried for losing a battle, not tried for rebellion. Pause, tried for atrocities against civilians, in what some historians call the first war crimes trial in history. Pause. The sentence was death, but first, they had to unmake him as a knight. Peter von Hagenbach, born around 1420 in Burgundy. A skilled soldier and commander, he served Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, one of the most powerful men in Europe. Pause. Charles appointed Hagenbach as governor of the Upper Rhine territories, a vast area including modern Alsace. Hagenbach's job was to control it, to collect taxes, maintain order, enforce Burgundian authority. Darker, he did this through terror. His soldiers looted towns systematically. They committed violence against civilians. Men were killed, women were assaulted. Hagenbach watched, allowed it, sometimes ordered it. Pause. For years, the people of the Rhine suffered under him. While Charles the Bold was alive, no one could stop it. Then the political situation changed, and suddenly, Hagenbach had no protector. An alliance formed. Swiss cantons, Austrian Archduke, free cities of the Rhine, they had all suffered under Hagenbach. They had documented the atrocities, the murders, the assaults, the systematic plunder. Pause. Hagenbach was arrested, brought to Breisach, the city where he had committed some of his worst crimes, facing the people he had terrorized. Pause. This was unprecedented. Knights were not tried for how they treated conquered people. That was simply war. That was simply power. Nobody had ever been put on trial for atrocities against civilians. Not like this. Not formally. Not with judges and witnesses and evidence. Quietly, until now, Hagenbach had a defense. He used it confidently. It was the same defense as. He bold. His soldiers served him. He gave orders, and they obeyed. That was the chain of command. That was how it worked. He was a knight, a soldier, not a judge, not responsible for what his men did in his name. The court did not accept this defense. They ruled that a commander was responsible for the actions of his troops, that following orders was not a defense for atrocity. that some acts were wrong regardless of who commanded them. These were ideas 500 years ahead of their time. Hagenbach was convicted, sentenced to death. But here is where the medieval world asserted itself. A knight could not simply be executed. Not like a common criminal. He had to be formally degraded, stripped of his knightly status, made into a commoner. And only then could he be killed. The ceremony was deliberate, theatrical, symbolic. Hagenbach was strapped to a wooden post. He was wearing his golden spurs, the symbol of knighthood, earned through years of military service, representing everything the order stood for. The executioner raised a hammer and smashed it down on the golden spurs, shattering them into fragments. Then they brought his sword, the personal weapon he had carried into battle, laid it across a block, and broke the steel blade in half. In front of him, only then was Peter von Hagenbach dragged to the block and beheaded, as a commoner, not as a knight. The trial of Peter von Hagenbach established principles, revolutionary principles. A commander is responsible for what his forces do. Following orders does not absolve you. International alliances can prosecute individuals for crimes against humanity. There are some actions that no authority can legitimately command. In 1474, 500 years before Nuremberg, these ideas were spoken aloud, in a court of law, with witnesses, evidence, judgment. Were they enforced consistently after that? No. The history of warfare makes that brutally clear. Atrocities continued for centuries, and still continue today. But the principle was established. The crack appeared in the wall. The idea was spoken, that soldiers, commanders, governors could be held accountable. Must be held accountable. Peter von Hagenbach, his golden spurs broken, his sword shattered, his knighthood unmade, his head removed. He is remembered not for his military career, but for the trial, for the principle that outlasted him, for the crack in the idea that power is above accountability. Every war crimes tribunal since then, from Nuremberg to The Hague to today, has roots in that courtroom in Breisach. In 1474, sometimes the most important legacy of a man is not what he built, but what he was tried for. Subscribe, because justice, even slow, eventually arrives.